So hi, I'm Carrie Marshall. I am the job developer here at Reachability in Halifax. And today I have with me Shelley Alward-MacLeod, and we're going to talk a little bit about disclosure. Shelley, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Thank you for having me today. I'm Shelley Alward-MacLeod, and I own my own practice, HR on the Go Incorporated. I do employment law consulting, alternative dispute resolution, workplace investigation. So I work with clients from all over Atlantic Canada in a variety of workplace situations.
Perfect, thank you. So what I thought we would do today is just kind of look at the hiring process for somebody that has a disability, right from sort of looking for jobs into going through an interview and then being hired, and what it looks like to disclose their disability and potentially some accommodations they might need. So my first question for you is, when we're looking at a job during job search, there are sometimes descriptions at the bottom that say things like, if you are contacted by whichever company regarding a job opportunity or testing, please advise if you require accommodation. Or there's other ones that say things like, to comply with applicable laws ensuring equal employment opportunities to qualified individuals with a disability, the company may make reasonable accommodations for the known physical or mental limitations of an otherwise qualified individual with a disability. It's like a lot of words and a lot of tongue twisting. So I was hoping we could kind of break those apart a little bit and talk about different things like, what would the employer consider an accommodation? How do we disclose that information? And how do we ask for an accommodation? Would it be in writing? Would we call them in person? What kind of things does that look like?
Right. So it always makes me happy when I do see job ads that actually have some type of rider, if you will, okay, on the bottom of their job ad. And while you could say maybe people are just making lip service, they're cutting and pasting that because somebody told them that should be on there, but that's already a step ahead of some employers or some corporations. So the first step is that if that is on there, then I find it does make it easier because if you've been asked to come for an interview, then you should go right ahead and state what the needs are. State that I'm going to be arriving in a wheelchair, I'm going to be arriving with a crutch, or I have some hearing impairment. So if we're going to be doing this virtually, I'd like to have closed captioning. If we're going to, depending on what floor, if we're meeting in person, it's going to be. It could also be that um, you have some anxiety, and it causes maybe some thought process, like you're not able to think quite as quickly, and that doesn't even usually come from anxiety. Some people are just deep thinkers, they need to process, they take longer to process. So I find that either once I get to the interview, some people do introductions and ask if you have any questions, kind of give you a lay of the land of what's going to happen during the interview process, or you can ask prior to say that just wanted to let you know that while I do comprehend all of the questions that people ask me, I am a bit of a thinker, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm taking a few moments longer to answer your question, it's not because I don't know the answer, it's because I'm taking some time to process. So I would ask that you please, bear with me during that time. Um, and then, it's just setting it out nicely for people so that you don't have people saying, well, did you want me to repeat that question? Because people don't like silence, right? And if you don't tell them, then they're going to keep talking and they're going to kind of almost be poking at you. And if you're trying to think of what the answer is, it's going to, even if you don't have anxiety, it's going to build up your anxiety because during an interview, we're all a little bit nervous because we don't know what they're going to be asking. Um, One of the other things you can do is, to help, with anxiety, with really anything, is when you're asked to attend an interview, you can ask them if there is, do you have a set list of questions that you would provide prior to the interview, or is there any specific information I should be bringing with me or considering bringing with me to the interview? Because many employers now are providing questions in advance because they have a very structured interview process. For instance, at the provincial government, federal government, they will give the questions in advance so that you'll have a chance to look at them. Sometimes you'll be asked to arrive a certain amount of time early, or you'll get them in the email prior to the meeting. So those are all good things about before the interview. Now, Carrie, you asked one of the questions, about some of those notations on the bottom of a job ad. But that does make it easier to disclose because the employer, the potential new employer, has already said we're willing to have a discussion, right? But what about the job ad that doesn't have that on the bottom? I still think that you follow the same approach. If you need an accommodation for the interview, right, you're the one that needs to be successful, right? You need to make sure that, that they understand. So there's nothing wrong with, with asking, with, saying, yes, I would love to come to that interview. I just want to, again, clarify, what floor it's on. As I have some mobility issues, and I will, need to make sure that I have access to an elevator, or whatever the case may be. And whether you do it verbally or in writing is really at your comfort level, right? I find today mostly people are sending you an email with all the details of your interview. Everybody has busy lives and they don't seem to be picking up the phone and calling as much anymore. So then it's perfectly acceptable to just send them back an email and let them know. And, be specific, right? The thing, it's mostly not that people don't want to accommodate you. It's that people don't know. Okay, they don't know what they don't know. So if you don't state what accommodation request, for instance, if you just, said, so I'll be needing some accommodation, period, send, right? That, allows for a lot of confusion, okay, on the employer's part. Okay, well, what do they mean by that? I don't know. Oh my gosh, and then that's where, they may just pass over you, right? Because now they don't know. So you need to, be very clear, as I, noted in some of my examples. Be very clear on what it is that you're looking for, because then it makes it easy for them. You're not asking if the building has an elevator, okay, or a ramp, okay. It's very easy. It either does or it doesn't, right? And there's lots of times, it's not because they don't want to interview, it's lots of times that they haven't really thought about that yet, right? So, be very clear on what you're looking for.
Perfect. That's excellent. I really appreciate all of that great information in the first question. And the way I see it is that's a lot of really great information before the process takes place. And I know for myself, I've been in interviews before where that question comes up. Would you require accommodation in the workplace?
Right.
And so it's kind of a hard question to answer because you want to tell them information, but you feel like you don't want to tell them too much information because sometimes you feel a little anxious about whether that will kind of turn them off a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about what might be good information to tell and some that you might not need to move forward with, really?
Right. So it's a little bit tricky. If during the interview process they're asking, okay, if you need an accommodation, like that specifically comes up. Do you have any mental, physical, any limitations that you might need to have addressed in order to be successful in this job? However they word it, I've seen it worded a lot. If they're asking that question and you do need accommodation, right, and you say no because you're afraid, okay, of disclosing, and then they hire you, yay, okay, but then fast forward to a couple days on the job and now you're going to ask for an accommodation. They would be within their rights, okay, to terminate your employment immediately for falsification of the interview process because you answered, no, I don't need any accommodation, but yet 2 days onto the job, you're now needing an accommodation. So you want to be a little bit careful, when they're asking that question of saying no, when in fact you really do need an accommodation. But what if they don't ask that, or how to disclose that? So whether you need to tell them about your specific accommodation request really depends on the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying for, let's say you have, and I like use an example of, let's say you have Crohn's disease, right? You might need to make frequent trips to the washroom during the day. If you're in a job where you are sitting in a cubicle or in an office and you have the ability to get up and move around during the day, and you don't need to be asking to use the facilities, you're not a cashier, right? Or not, working in a retail environment where maybe you're the only person on shift, then you need to say to yourself, do I need to disclose at the interview process? Do I need to disclose at the hiring process? Because is it really going to affect my job? Right? But if it's because you have an accommodation request, you might have carpal tunnel syndrome, right? But you work very well if you have the keyboard at the right height, and your monitor is raised up on a specific platform, and your chair is just so. So you would, and you're going to be having that same desk job, right? You would want to disclose that, but you would want to disclose exactly what it is that you're looking for. And in many cases, you come with your own. I know, one of my friends has a back issue, right? And she discloses that, yes, I do have a back issue, but I would like to be able to bring my own chair to the job because it fits me perfectly. And right away, the employer's like, okay, why not? They're bringing their own chairs, not costing me anything, right? Or if you do need specific aids, there's many organizations out there, Reachability included, okay, that can help you access and help you work with the employer to access those particular aids. So, you need to think about, is it specific to you? As to how much to disclose, and bearing in mind that you don't have to disclose your actual medical condition, right? You never have to disclose that. What you need to disclose is if you need a specific accommodation and what that is. There's a difference.
And I think that's one of the concerning things for a lot of people is
right.
The fear of not knowing if there will be more questions asked, and
right.
then kind of how do you broach that? So if there are a lot of employers that are still learning how to be accessible.
Right.
And we're working towards helping people get
right.
there. But there could come a time where you're having that conversation and it's knowing that you have the right to say, I don't need to disclose that information
right.
to you at this point. And so it's helpful to know that your medical right. condition doesn't actually need to be disclosed. You don't have to go
right.
into great detail. If they decide that is something that they need more information on, how would they go about asking you to provide that to them? Would it be like a doctor's note or?
Right. So yes, so the employer does have the right, if you're not able to be specific or you're actually requesting an accommodation, the employer does have the right to ask for additional medical information. Not because they disbelieve you, although that's sort of the first, because you would ask that, kind of jump into the defensive mode. Well, don't you believe me? But the legislation also states that the employer should have access to that, should make sure that they have the appropriate medical information and documentation, because now it could potentially become a liability for them if they've not provided you the right tools, okay? Then there could be an accident in the workplace. So they're wanting to get the right information right up front. So they might ask you to go to your doctor, provide medical information. Some, larger corporations have a specific form that they would have you fill out and return to them, which really just lists, all of the things. And again, it doesn't actually list, okay, you have Crohn's disease, you have, XYZ, you have, MS, right? Or any of those. It doesn't list that. What it lists is what are your restrictions and abilities.
Okay, so we kind of touched on that a little bit. The next question is more geared towards during the process. Nobody really asked you those questions. They didn't think of it. And now you have been hired and you do require accommodation. How do you go about broaching that sort of conversation? Who would you talk to? Would it be the HR person, supervisor, manager? What kind of conversation would that be?
Right, exactly. So, depending on the organization, you've now been hired. It's your first day of work. And I wouldn't let it go past the first day of work, right? Because then that's when things start to get complicated. One, for your safety and health and well-being. But also the longer it goes on, then, it makes it harder to come back from that. So on day one, you would talk to, whoever's sort of that first person who's doing your orientation. And in some cases, you're sent immediately to the HR department, which would be wonderful because then you could have that conversation right then. Or it could be that you're meeting with your supervisor. The only person I wouldn't tell is sometimes you're set up to meet with a mentor, like a colleague who's going to be doing your training. It's none of their business, frankly. So what you'd want to do is sometime during that day, ask to be able to speak to, HR if they were involved into your interviewing, or the supervisor, so that you could have that conversation and disclose.
Perfect. Excellent. This is all really great information. I'm really excited that we're having these conversations. We kind of touched a little bit already on this question, and it's how we were talking about, I do have a disability. You would use Crohn's as an example. It's not really going to affect anything right now, but it potentially could later.
Right.
Another one that comes up would be like anxiety or depression, or some of those things that are well managed at the time, but potentially could be a problem down the line.
Right.
Is that something that we would disclose on the first day as well, or would we how would we have that conversation?
For those particular ones, I mean, again, it's going to be what's your comfort level, because if even with Crohn's, right, and maybe you don't suffer from anxiety, but even with Crohn's, if you don't disclose, but it's going to niggle at you and worry you, it's probably going to affect your Crohn's because anxiety is kind of a trigger. But, what I suggest is, the first day of employment, may or may not be appropriate. You'd want to see what the opening was, but sometime in that, very, first weekish, okay, when you have a chance, that would be a conversation with your supervisor. And I don't want you to make a big deal of it, right? Because it's not a big deal. It's part of who you are. You can still do the job, right? So, you might bring up that, I just want to let you know that I do have Crohn's, okay? And so if you do see me getting up, and zipping off to the bathroom, don't let that worry you. I'm able to manage it. And, I can manage my workload around that. But I just wanted you to know, I'm not just running out to talk on my phone every 5 minutes. If it's anxiety, again, similar to Crohn's, and you don't know when that's going to pop up, you can just say, to your supervisor, just want you to know, I suffer a bit from anxiety or depression. It's under control and I'm managing it, but there might be times when I take a pause or I think a little bit deeper. Or if there's a time when, I maybe just get a little overwhelmed by something, my method of coping is I just like to take, a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break. Or how would you like us to accommodate that? Would you like me to send you a quick email to say I'm just stepping out for 30 minutes, and work that out, but talk about it in a very conversational tone. Because you do want to, it's not you don't want to create to your new employer, this is going to be a barrier. So let's talk about how we're going to get past it, because it's not going to be a barrier, right? It's only a barrier if you think it's going to be a barrier.
So Shelley, tell me a little bit more about, once we've been at the job for a while, if something does come up, if there's an accident of some sort, or if we find out later on that we do need an accommodation, how would we go about addressing that?
not so much like on the first week of employment, but disclosure can happen, long after you're employed, and it can happen because we're suddenly diagnosed with, with something that we weren't diagnosed with before. Or it could be something that is that you need to disclose because it's a temporary disability. So the same rules would apply. You might have broken your leg, right? And you're going to be, and you're a cashier at Superstore. Well, I probably shouldn't say the names. Maybe they'll send me gift cards. Anyway, you can sit. You can tell them I've broken my leg. It's going to be obvious, all right? So it's not one of those things that we say that you don't have to disclose your medical information, but some will be obvious when you show up, one day without crutches and the next day with a full leg cast and crutches. It's probably obvious. But the concern then will be, I need an accommodation, right? And probably you're bringing a doctor's note with you, okay? And the accommodation it's not that I can't do my job. I can still be the cashier, but it requires that I'm going to need to sit on a stool or keep my leg elevated. And it may very well be a gradual process where for the first 2 weeks, I'm going to, only be able to work for 4 hours a day, or I'm going to need to take small breaks or keep my foot elevated. And then gradually I might be able to return to where I can sit, but then have, a half hour of weight bearing and so forth. So that needs to be disclosed. And if you're asking for those accommodations, same rules apply. The employer does have the right to ask for medical documentation. Might be a form of their own. It might be, one that they ask you to get from your doctor. The broken leg is pretty obvious, but there would be others. There would be, you're suffering from a bout of depression, and you need them to know, and your doctor's recommending that you only work certain hours of the day, right? To take time off, or because you're going to therapy or whatever those cases are. But that is an accommodation, albeit it might be temporary, short term. It's still another thing that needs to be disclosed, and we often get that confused, right?
So what I'm taking away from the conversation we're having so far is that those job ads that do have a little blurb about accommodation are already a step ahead of the others in the process of being accessible. So we should take advantage of that. And we should be open and honest, but only to the capacity of how it will affect our job or if it will affect our job.
Right.
And then once we are hired and are working, if we have some other things that are going on with us that are managed, it's better to have more of a casual conversation about it and not make it appear as such a big, strong barrier that's in the way, because right now it's not, and most likely it won't be, but there is a potential for it to sort of bring up some stuff in the workplace.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Just, giving another example of why, things that you wouldn't need to disclose. So you can see I'm wearing glasses, right? And that is, an accommodation issue, could be a disclosure issue if I was going to be a pilot, right? But if I'm going to be, an administrative assistant, right, and my glasses are able to provide me with my own accommodation to get the job done, then there'd be no need to disclose. Well, like I have a bit of an eyesight impairment, which I do. Okay, really, anybody who wears glasses has an impairment. But there'd be no need to disclose that because I'm wearing glasses and it's fixed on its own, so it's not impacting my job. Right.
That's a very good example. And then we can just kind of relate that to some of the other things that are happening with us. If it's not impacting our job at this point,
right,
it doesn't really need to be talked about. And the other thing that you mentioned that I really liked is knowing that you have the right to say, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to go into more detail about that right now. If you need more information, I can provide it from my doctor. And that way you don't have to have that awkward conversation. You don't have to feel defensive. You can just feel empowered to talk about what you need to and then move through the process. And if it is something that comes up later, it's an easier way to address the issues.
Absolutely. And there's the flip side of that, which I like to title oversharing. And that it actually makes people uncomfortable, right? I mean, there's those people who want to know every single detail and it's none of their business, and you can, politely tell them that. But there's telling the employer every single thing in great detail because a lot of people don't know how to react to that, right? And now they're like, well, why do I have all this information? What do I do with all this information? And then, they're concerned because now it's a privacy issue. It's a breach of confidentiality. Like, do I tell HR this? Like, what am I supposed to tell HR? I know this stuff. I don't think I need to know it. So that often causes conflict, right? Because the person receiving that information has no idea what to do with it. And they really don't need that information. What they really need is, what accommodation do you need?
Yeah. And that's perfect. I think that's one of the concerns that we have when we're helping people look for employment is helping them understand what is oversharing and what isn't. So it's good to know. Just stick with the actual accommodations that you need. Be very specific and detailed about that, but not so much the reason why you need those accommodations.
Absolutely. And, one of the ones that is kind of hard to get around is, I think, about when we think about like the difference between oversharing is somebody who, is diabetic and, they need to maybe give themselves injections during the day. And so they need to make sure that there's a sharps container available. So they might be asking those things. So I do find that, that people, and I've learned this, this a bit about, people, as my husband has diabetes, that you can't really say, so I need an accommodation. I'm going to need a sharps container because I have to shoot myself up during the day. Right? Like, it just doesn't come across well, right? And while it's really none of their business, right? They need to, people will jump to all kinds of conclusions. And some people, that, are diabetic, they do, ask for those particular accommodations, and they will right away ask, I think of as an example, they'll say, I'm diabetic, and a lot of people know what that is. And I moderate with insulin, but I do need to eat. Okay. Routinely through the day, like every 2 hours, I need to have something to eat. So, I just want to make sure it's okay if I'm going to be able to eat at my desk, or am I going to be able to step away from the cash register or my crane that I'm operating, or can I bring food with me? Some of those kind of things. So,
there are situations
you have to balance, what it is, right?
Yeah, and that makes total sense.
Yes.
I guess just I feel like we've really talked about a lot of different things, and I'm just thinking if people have more questions or concerns, they can either reach out to us here at Reachability, or would they be able to contact you as well if they had some specific questions?
Absolutely. So they can either, Carrie, they can either reach out to you or anybody at Reachability, and they can put you in touch with me, or you can reach out to me directly. My email is Shelley, Shelley, at hronthego.ca, or you could look me up on my website, which is hronthego.ca. So not a lot to remember. And if you can't remember that, again, just give Carrie a call. She can give you my information.
That's really great. I really appreciate your time and being here to help us with some of this stuff today. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me.